I'm Theron Ramacharaka. This video is about cultivation of the will. Simple methods, simple techniques, okay? I hope to keep this one brief. Here I'm going to just briefly refer to a man named Frank Channing Haddock. Frank Channing Haddock, born November 17th, 1853, in Watertown, New York, died February 9th, 1915. He was a New Thought writer and lecturer. Here in Wikipedia, it says Frank Channing Haddock, blah, blah, blah. He had been in ministry as a Methodist. When he retired from it to become a writer, he became a New Thought author and lecturer. He became well known for his teachings on willpower, cultivation of the will, ethics, financial and business success, philosophy, and spirituality. And like his contemporaries, William Walker Atkinson and Charles F. Hannell, he exemplified the more secular and less overtly religious side of the New Thought movement. So here, this puts him as a contemporary, ideologically, as well as temporally, William Walker Atkinson, who is the more popular of the two, William Walker Atkinson. So here I'm just going to briefly refer to him using some terminology of Frank Channing Haddock's concerning the development and cultivation of the will. I have poured through some of his basic works, The Power of Will, The Cultivation of Will, and a few others. And his Power of Will book is quite thick. I was at one time going to narrate the whole thing, but it's rather involved and it's extremely lengthy. So here I'm just going to point out that he refers to, and this is the part I'm going to use here for this video, he refers to modes of will. But he calls them moods of will, but I call them modes of operation. Because the way he uses the word moods of will, moods of the will, that may be an early 1900s way of saying modes. Because the context in which he uses the term always has to do with what we would call modes of operation, or phases of it, as William Walker Atkinson would say, phases of the same thing, aspects of it, okay, or subdivisions of the operation of will. So I'm going to call them modes of will operation. If you look into Frank Channing Haddock's work, you'll find the word moods. I'm saying modes because it's the way he was using the term. All right, so there are various modes of will actualization or operation, the way it manifests, the ways we can use it. One is decision. Coming to a decision is a willful act. Another one is continuance, that is following through with that decision. Perseverance is another, that is continuing or practicing continuance in the face of obstacles. Perseverance. All right, that's three right there. He has several more. One that many people do not consider, and which I consider to be very important. I put it right at the top of the list when it comes to importance, when it comes to cultivation of the use of will, developing your use of the power of will. It's one of the modes that he talks about, or moods that he talks about. It's restraint. Now, that's the one, that's what I'm going to focus on here. Restraint. As well as I'm going to tie it in with something else. A method, a technique for the development of will, a very strong one. Okay, That's all I'm going to say about Frank Channing Haddock. We're going to go with the mode of will operation called restraint. Okay, so what is restraint? Well, it's rather than doing something, it's not doing something. Okay? It's holding back from doing something. Now, when we think of power of will, we think of something that pushes, pushes toward, toward bringing something into being, or toward an action, bringing forth an action. Whether it's a mental act or a physical act, an emotional act, whatever, an act, right? Something that it's a power. It pushes, okay? Willpower drives towards something. Okay. We think of will bringing forth action. Okay. We normally don't think of it as working toward the opposite goal, to refrain from action. If we still want to talk about it pushing toward an action, then in this case of restraint, it would be pushing toward not engaging in an action. In other words, like inaction with regard to a certain thing. Restraint. If restraint in itself is seen as a positive pole thing, then will is pushing directly toward that. Yes, restraint. All right. However you want to look at it, restraint is not what we typically think of as an act of will. All right. But it is an act of will to restrain ourselves, to refrain from doing something. Restraint so that we can refrain from doing something. Restraint. Okay. Now, let's think about this. If we use will to engage in an action, all right, will pushes us toward an action and we're engaging in it, then how many other actions are we not engaging in at that moment? If will has been employed by way of decision, continuance, whatever, right? So that now we're engaging in the willful act. An act. Among all acts that are possible. And at that moment, we are refraining from all those others by way of focusing on engaging in one. Among all possible acts, we have selected one. So in a sense, will, when brought to bear toward any act, is engaging, it's in an indirect way, or in a kind of like a back burner way, restraint all the time, anyway. So this is a matter of our focus. Are we focusing on, when we're talking about restraint, if we're focusing, if we're engaging in that directly, then that's on the front burner. But it's always on the back burner at least, so to speak, with the burner thing, the burner metaphor. Engaging in some specific willed act, we are refraining or restraining it with respect to all the others by refraining from them in favor of one selected one. But what if we have an act that we were going to engage in, but we hold back on it? Now we're putting restraint out in the front. We're using it directly. Now, that can be a very difficult thing to do. And for that reason, and insofar also insofar as this is not a mode of will operation much talked about or even thought of. And third, insofar as restraint is always involved in will anyway. Whenever something is selected, a decision is made, we're making the decision in some specific direction to the exclusion of other directions. So restraint is always involved. Anyway, for those three reasons, I am going to give you a simple technique here that I think will significantly, if practiced methodologically, systematically, should push in the direction of your cultivation of greater use of the power of will. All right, so but let me, just before laying this out, which is just going to be a rough layout, you do with it what you will. All right. I also want to talk about a very, very powerful way to develop your use of will is to decide, use the mode of will operation called decision, to do something, to engage in an act that you prefer not to do. Now, it doesn't have to be a really difficult thing, like something that you strongly want to, don't want to do. You would rather refrain from it and use restraint, knowingly or unknowingly, something that you really abhor, and now you decide, okay, this is my first run through with practice in developing will by this technique that Theron Ramacharaka gave me on a YouTube video. Don't make it something difficult. Start with something simple, but something you don't want to do. Decide to do it, and then do it. This really exercises the, metaphorically speaking, muscle of your power of will. This is putting a little resistance on there. Like if you're lifting weights, why lift 1 pound? Unless that's the most you can do. Put a little bit more weight on there. Make it work. Give yourself some resistance. This will strengthen your muscles physically. All right. Well, same way here. You could, let's just say here metaphorically or analogically, your will is working like a muscle here. The more you use it and increase the resistance as you're going, with practice, the stronger it gets. Okay. You're giving it harder tasks as you go, but you don't just jump into something really heavy right away. It's not good, right? Start light and build up. Okay, so pick something that you don't want to do, but it's not going to be an enormous challenge or put you way out of your way if you go ahead and do it. All right, pick something simple, but something you prefer not to do. You'd rather practice restraint. Involuntarily. Not that you would be knowingly or consciously practicing restraint, but you just don't want to do it, okay? It's not in your desires, all right? Not in your list of desires or high on your list of motives, all right? Pick something and do it. That's a very good way to strengthen your use of will. But now remember, if you're going to do this, if you're going to use this method, and you're going to consciously employ this method for the purpose of developing your use of will for other applications, well, don't make the decision to do it and then not do it, whatever this thing is that you prefer not to do. That'll weaken your will. It won't just keep it the same. It won't just not strengthen it right then. It will weaken it. Okay? I want you to understand that. So if you're going to engage in this technique, follow through. Have continuance. Exercise continuance. Following your decision. Do it. This thing that you don't want to do. Make it something simple, though. Do this numerous times. Get the hang of it. Learn how it feels. What feelings come from doing it. The different levels of slight energy change that occur. Get familiar with it. Learn its landscape. Learn its little subtle energy fluctuations that lead up to it, causing it, and then effects from it inside. How you feel, how this works. Okay, experience it. Then add a little bit more difficulty. Now, at the same time, remember, to bring out restraint to the front of your thought at the same time. Chances are, if you are willfully deciding upon and continuing through, following through with something you didn't want to do, there's probably something else you'd rather do instead. So bear in mind what other things you could be doing, and you're going to restrain. You're going to practice restraint with respect to those. Like, deny them and affirm this other thing and do it. This thing you didn't want to do. In favor of, actively speaking, in favor of the things that you would rather do. Okay? So first of all, here's the thing, all right? Like this. All right, here's this thing I don't want to do. There are other things I could be doing. Remember, anytime you single out a specific action to engage in willfully, there are all other possible acts that you could be doing. Some which you would prefer, some which maybe you wouldn't. But you can always think of, all right, look, here's this thing I don't want to do. Oh, I'd rather do this other thing over here. All right, look at that thing. Take a mental stop, consider that other thing or set of other things that you could be doing instead or would rather do at the moment, and intentionally invoke the mode of will operation called restraint with respect to them. Give that mode of operation, will operation, attention. Excuse me. You may say this to yourself. I restrain. You practice restraint with respect to those other things right now. I will refrain from doing them by invoking and manifesting, actualizing restraint as a mode of will operation. With respect to those things, I will not do them. Always, though, with a denial like that, that's like a denial statement, right? I will not, okay? A not statement. Never just do one of those alone. There are dangers and risks involved in that. The subconscious mind will not pick up on the not. It will pick up on the emotional content of the thing itself that you're saying not about. And if those are things you'd rather be doing, the subconscious mind is going to kind of like guide you to do those things regardless of the word not in there. You must follow a denial with an affirmation that is a positive statement. So I will refrain by using restraint. I will refrain from doing these other things that I'd rather do right now. I will, however, practice decision and continuance with respect to this other thing that I prefer not to do. Not these things, but that thing. Get it? That way you're directly practicing restraint as well as going ahead and doing something you prefer not to do. This is a very strong tool. Very strong. And slowly increase the difficulty with practice. This may not mean a lot to you the first time. But if you're like a lot of people, you'll just listen to this and say, hey, man, that's really cool. Now I got it. I'll do it when I need to. Well, when you need to, you probably won't even remember it. Let alone be able to employ it effectively. Any more effectively than you normally do. Wherever you're at with that right now in life. You might be pretty good at it. And then you think, well, I don't need this. Well, I'm pretty good at this. But you think there's no end to this development? I mean, you think there's an end to it? No, there's not. There's no end to it. You can always use greater control over this, greater access to and use of your power of will. All right? So, if you tried it once and it didn't have any huge result, you may not do it again. You say, well, yeah, that was kind of cool. But, no big deal. Well, you didn't practice it enough. You didn't do it long enough. You didn't have enough repetitions for it to have any great impact in your in developing your use of will. Or maybe you think, well, there, I got it now. I did it once, I got it. Good. I did it. Now I'm better at it all. No, not yet, folks. You'll know when bigger results roll in. You'll know. It takes time. It takes practice every day. If you're going to employ this simple technique, do it every day. I've said elsewhere here, do things 3 times in a row. There's one thing to do 3 times in a row at one time. Like if you're going to do this every day, then whatever it is you're going to do it 3 times in a row right then. Or 3 different times that day with no sleep in between. 3. That establishes a pattern, a mental pattern. Now, you want to make that into a mental habit? That's a different thing. That takes at least 21 days in a row, which is 3 weeks. It takes that long to start to build the foundation upon which to build a mental habit. That takes 21 days at the minimum. So 3 times in a row or 3 times in a day, this same thing. Now each day could be something different, but don't get too difficult until 21 days are up. Don't increase or increment the difficulty level until you have done this for 21 days as well as the 3 times in a row thing. 3 times in a row each day for 21 days. That way you have established the foundation upon which to build a mental habit that has a pattern to it. And you've built the pattern. Then you can maybe increment the difficulty level a little bit and keep on going until this is a habit. And then you can incorporate it into other techniques that you're using for your personal development. Work them in together to make them work in tandem, in parallel with one another. But give this all time. Develop each thing separately at first. Giving it each in its due attention to build the patterns, to build the habits. Then you can mix them together. I call this blending techniques into methods of action. And once you blend enough of those together, methods of action, you develop a new way of being. All right, that's it. I'm Theron Ramacharaka. Be well.